Pam Bondi sat back in her office, the dim light of the evening casting long shadows across the desk where a pile of files awaited her scrutiny. It had been months of investigation, sifting through paper trails, emails, and obscure connections that had led to one conclusion: something far more sinister was at play in the highest corridors of power. She knew it was only a matter of time before the truth would break wide open, but tonight, the pieces were finally aligning. Hunter Biden, son of the sitting president, had long been a subject of speculation. But what Pam had uncovered was something far deeper than any of the casual rumors that had floated through the political gossip mill. It was the kind of thing that could shake the foundations of the administration, a vast empire of shady deals, hidden payments, and suspicious foreign connections. But what made it even more dangerous was the cover-up, the unspoken cooperation between the Department of Justice and the people who had everything to lose if the story got out. Pam wasn't about to let this be buried under layers of political smoke and mirrors. She leaned forward, opening the final file of the night. This one was different. It contained more than just documents. It had names, dates, locations. It had proof. "Here we go," she muttered under her breath. Pam made a quick phone call. The investigation was about to go public. The next morning, Pam stood before a group of reporters, the buzz of cameras and whispers filling the air. Her face was calm, but her heart raced. She knew the moment she revealed what she had uncovered, there would be no going back. The implications were staggering. The media would explode, the political landscape would shift, and the Biden administration would be forced into defensive mode. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady, each word calculated to hit hard. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pam began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "What I'm about to tell you is not based on speculation, but on concrete evidence, a web of corruption spanning multiple continents, involving individuals who thought they could act with impunity, knowing that they had the power to cover their tracks." The room grew quiet, reporters leaning forward, pens ready to scribble down the bombshells she was about to drop. Hunter Biden, the son of President Joe Biden, has been at the center of an international operation involving foreign governments, business dealings, and millions of dollars in unreported funds. These deals weren't isolated, they were a coordinated effort to leverage his father's position. "We have evidence showing that not only were these deals made behind closed doors, but they were covered up by officials in the Department of Justice, people who should have been impartial, but were instead complicit in protecting those with the most to lose." There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Pam continued, "We've gathered documents that trace these transactions back to China, Ukraine, and even countries that you wouldn't expect. And this is just the beginning." Pam saw the skepticism on some faces. She knew she had to hit harder, or they would dismiss her as another conspiracy theorist. She reached into her bag and pulled out a set of documents, holding them up for all to see. "These are the communications, emails, text messages, and financial records, that tie these deals directly to the highest levels of power. These are the same documents that have been swept under the rug by the very people tasked with investigating them. But I'm not here to let this be swept away." Her voice became more resolute, the weight of what she was about to expose hanging in the air. "The Department of Justice had these documents for months and did nothing. No investigation, no public hearings. Instead, they worked to ensure the story never reached the light of day." Pam paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. She was certain the next few days would be chaotic. But the truth had to come out, there was no turning back now. The fallout from Pam's press conference was immediate and relentless. The media, both supportive and adversarial, picked up the story with the frenzy of a wildfire. Headlines screamed about Hunter Biden's deals with foreign entities, the shadowy connections between the Bidens and international businessmen, and the alleged cover-up orchestrated by the Department of Justice. On Capitol Hill, the phones of congressional leaders rang off the hook. Allies of the Biden administration scrambled to downplay the scandal, while Republicans saw a golden opportunity to pull at the threads Pam had exposed. Investigations were launched, hearings were scheduled, and the public was left grappling with the reality that a sitting president's family was possibly involved in a vast international scandal. Pam Bondi had become the center of attention. The backlash was inevitable. Democratic pundits wasted no time accusing her of orchestrating a partisan smear campaign, claiming that her motivations were politically driven. They attacked her character, painting her as a puppet of the right-wing agenda, and labeled the investigation a distraction from more important issues facing the country. But Pam knew better. She wasn't playing politics. She was exposing a system that was rotting from the inside out. And she wasn't going to let the people responsible for covering up these crimes get away with it. It wasn't long before Pam received a series of chilling phone calls. First, it was an anonymous voice warning her to watch her back. Then came more ominous messages, cryptic threats that became less veiled and more personal. She didn't flinch. She was used to intimidation in the political arena, but this was different. Her office received a package, unopened, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside, there was a note that simply read, "You're not safe anymore." Along with the note, there was a small, unsettling photograph of Pam's house taken from across the street. It was clear that the people who had been exposed weren't going to just let her walk away. The stakes were higher than ever. In the midst of the growing chaos, Pam was summoned to a high-level meeting with senior figures in Washington, including some of her closest allies. They weren't just discussing the scandal. They were planning the next steps. As the meeting progressed, one name kept coming up, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. Despite the official narrative, everyone in the room knew that he had been the linchpin in the DOJ's failure to act. But calling him out would not be easy. Pam leaned forward, her expression hardened with resolve. It's not just Hunter. It's not just Joe Biden. It's the people who protected them. If we don't go after the Department of Justice's role in this, we're not solving the problem. We need a full investigation into how this was allowed to happen. The room went quiet. This was no longer just a scandal about Hunter Biden. This was about the very integrity of the institutions meant to protect American democracy. Pam could feel the tide turning. She knew what would happen next, more revelations, more investigations, and the relentless pursuit of the truth. But she was prepared for what was coming. There would be no turning back. As the investigations into Hunter Biden's dealings intensified, so did the pressure on the administration. Pam Bondi, having lit the fuse, watched as the political fallout spread like a tidal wave. Every day brought a new revelation, a new headline, each more damning than the last. The pressure mounted on President Joe Biden, whose approval ratings began to plummet as the scandal expanded beyond what anyone had anticipated. The hearing on Capitol Hill was set. The question on everyone's mind, would they really expose the full extent of the cover-up? It was more than just an investigation into Hunter Biden's actions, it was about the web of corruption that reached into the heart of the Department of Justice and the highest offices in Washington. The stakes were incredibly high. Pam was sitting at her desk late one night when the call came. The voice on the other end was familiar, Merrick Garland's assistant. She had been expecting this call for days. "They want to meet with you," the assistant said, the words crisp and formal. "The Attorney General will discuss the situation. It's important." Pam knew this wasn't a courtesy call. It was a warning. She accepted the meeting, knowing it could go one of two ways. Either they would try to silence her with threats or, if they were truly desperate, they might offer her something in exchange for her silence. The meeting was held in a nondescript government building in downtown Washington, a far cry from the lavish offices she was used to. Pam arrived early, her mind racing with every possible scenario. What were they going to offer her? Or worse, what were they going to threaten? Merrick Garland was already seated, his expression as cold and distant as ever. He looked like a man with nothing to lose. "Pam," he greeted her curtly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming. I'm sure you know why we're here." Pam sat down, keeping her composure despite the gnawing suspicion that she was walking into a trap. "We're in a difficult position," Garland continued. "Your actions have opened up a Pandora's box, and we have to contain the fallout. We want to know, are you willing to work with us to keep this from spiraling out of control? Pam raised an eyebrow. Work with you, she repeated, her tone sharp. You've had these documents for months. What do you mean by contain? Garland's face tightened. We're talking about a national security issue now. The exposure of these deals could have serious consequences, not just for the Bidens, but for the country. I'm offering you a chance to help mitigate the damage. In return, we can promise cooperation from our side, including full transparency and protections for you moving forward. Pam felt a chill creep up her spine. The word cooperation wasn't a negotiation, it was a veiled threat. This wasn't just about stopping a scandal anymore, it was about controlling the narrative before everything exploded. Why didn't you take action when you had the chance? She asked, leaning forward. Why didn't you investigate this from the beginning? Garland didn't flinch. We did what we thought was best at the time. But now we have to look at the bigger picture. If this scandal blows up, it will not only ruin the Biden family. It will destroy the integrity of our justice system, and that will have far-reaching effects. Pam wasn't buying it. She had seen enough cover-ups in her career to know when someone was trying to make a deal to save their skin. She leaned in, her voice low and steady. I'm not here to play games, Merrick. I'm here to expose the truth. If you think for 1 second I'm going to back down now, you're wrong. For the first time, there was a flicker of emotion in Garland's eyes. He leaned back, exhaling deeply. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. There's a lot at stake here. You don't know who you're up against. Pam stared him down, her resolve unshaken. I know exactly who I'm up against. And I'm not scared. The silence hung in the air for a long moment before Garland spoke again, his voice lower. You will regret this, Pam. But if you continue down this path, I won't be able to protect you. Pam stood, straightening her jacket. You don't need to protect me. I'm not backing down. The truth will come out, one way or another. As she left the meeting, she knew it was just the beginning. The battle lines were drawn. The question was no longer whether Hunter Biden and Joe Biden would face consequences, it was whether the entire justice system would implode under the weight of the corruption Pam had just uncovered. The truth was coming, and no one, least of all Merrick Garland, was going to stop it. As the weeks dragged on, the public's interest in the Hunter Biden scandal only grew. Pam's press conference had opened a floodgate, and the information pouring out of it was almost overwhelming. The media's thirst for new revelations, new angles, and new stories was insatiable. Pam knew this wasn't just about exposing Hunter, this was about shaking the foundations of the political establishment itself. Despite the threats, despite the smear campaigns, Pam kept pushing forward. She had spent the last month meeting with whistleblowers, gathering documents, and coordinating with lawyers who were equally determined to see justice done. The deeper she dug, the more horrifying the revelations became. This wasn't just one corrupt deal, it was a vast network of corruption, stretching all the way to the highest offices in the land. There were payoffs, backroom deals, secret bank accounts, and even private meetings between government officials and foreign adversaries. Pam could feel the storm growing. But it wasn't just the public that was paying attention anymore. The pressure inside the government had reached a boiling point. One cold morning, she received a call that would change everything. It was from an anonymous source within the FBI, a high-ranking official with access to classified information. I have the smoking gun, the voice on the other end said, its tone barely audible. But I need your help. They're watching me. If this gets out, I'm done. Pam felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the breakthrough she had been waiting for. I'll help you, she said, her voice firm. But you have to trust me. What do you have? The source hesitated before speaking, as if weighing the consequences of each word. You've seen the deals, the bank records, the emails. But there's one thing you don't know. Hunter Biden was only the middleman. The money, it didn't just go to him. It went to someone much closer to the top, someone who was pulling the strings all along. And we have proof. Top-secret communications between the Bidens and foreign governments, leaked intelligence reports showing direct involvement from people inside the White House. Pam's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The evidence she had been seeking. "Where is it?" she asked urgently. "There's a safe house," the source replied. "You'll have to move fast. We don't have much time before they realize what we've done." Pam's mind raced. This could change everything. It could be the smoking gun that brought down the entire Biden administration. But it was also a massive risk. She was stepping into dangerous territory, one where the stakes had escalated to life or death. That night, she met with her trusted team, a group of journalists, legal experts, and former intelligence officers who had been following the investigation. Together, they formulated a plan. The information they were about to uncover could change the course of history, but they needed to get it to the public before the government managed to silence them all. The next day, Pam and her team set off to retrieve the documents. They knew it wouldn't be easy. There were enemies in every corner, people who would stop at nothing to prevent the truth from coming out. By the time they reached the location, the weight of their mission hit Pam. They were about to open Pandora's box, and there would be no going back. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of a single lamp in the corner, where the safe was hidden. Pam didn't hesitate. She knew this was the moment that would define everything. With a quiet click, the safe opened, revealing stacks of papers, files, and a laptop. As Pam sifted through the contents, her hands shaking with adrenaline, she found what she was looking for: the names, the dates, the direct links between Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and the foreign officials who had been receiving kickbacks in exchange for political favors. The laptop contained encrypted communications, some of the most sensitive materials she had ever seen. It was irrefutable evidence. Pam immediately sent the documents to several trusted outlets. It was time to break the story wide open. Within hours, the world was rocked. The moment Pam's team released the contents of the safe, all hell broke loose. The emails, documents, and communications leaked to the press were undeniable. Every major news outlet picked up the story, and social media exploded with a frenzy of disbelief, anger, and shock. It was as if the political world had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. The contents revealed details no one could have predicted. Among the most damning were the encrypted conversations between Hunter Biden and foreign officials, where high-level political favors were exchanged for lucrative deals. But what made it worse was the evidence that Joe Biden, contrary to all prior assertions, had been deeply involved in these deals, not just as a father trying to protect his son, but as an active participant in the foreign dealings. The documents connected the Bidens to shady deals with foreign governments, Russia, China, and Ukraine, among others. A vast network of shell companies, secret bank accounts, and offshore assets funneled millions of dollars into their pockets. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial, it was concrete, backed up by receipts, contracts, and internal memos that revealed a systemic, coordinated effort to enrich the first family at the expense of the American people. The fallout in Washington was immediate. Senators and Congress members who had previously remained silent now found themselves under intense pressure to take action. Calls for impeachment grew louder by the hour. The hearings that had been scheduled to investigate Hunter Biden's dealings quickly turned into a full-scale investigation of the entire Biden family, and, by extension, the Department of Justice. Merrick Garland, who had already been on the defensive, now found himself in an impossible position. The DOJ could no longer protect the Bidens, too many powerful figures were involved, and the public had grown too enraged. Garland's name began to appear in the documents, with his involvement in delaying investigations, diverting resources, and even suppressing evidence that could have exposed the corruption months ago. It was a dangerous game, and now everyone who had been complicit in the cover-up was on the chopping block. Pam watched the chaos unfold, her phone ringing constantly with messages from lawmakers, reporters, and allies. Some were congratulating her, others offering their support. But she knew the war was far from over. This wasn't just about exposing a corrupt family, it was about taking down an entire network of political elites who had operated in the shadows for years. In a matter of days, the Biden administration's defenses began to crack. President Joe Biden, once confident in his ability to weather any storm, now found himself backed into a corner. His public speeches, once filled with confidence, were now laden with defensiveness and hesitation. The pressure from both sides of the aisle was too much to ignore. Pam's next move was clear. With the evidence now public, she wasn't going to let anyone sweep this under the rug. She was prepared to testify before Congress, to speak out against anyone, Republican or Democrat, who had helped to protect the Bidens and obstruct justice. As she prepared for the inevitable legal battles, Pam knew she was taking on the most powerful political dynasty in the country. But she also knew that the truth had a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep they tried to bury it. The storm had broken, and now it was time for the reckoning. The wave of revelations continued to ripple through Washington with growing intensity. Pam Bondi had ignited a political firestorm, but now she was entering the most dangerous phase of her fight. The entire nation was on edge. People on both sides of the aisle were demanding accountability. The documents, once hidden in the shadows, were now impossible to ignore, and the pressure to act was overwhelming. Inside the White House, chaos had replaced the usual calm demeanor of the administration. President Joe Biden, usually a veteran of political crises, found himself reeling. His approval rating had plummeted to historic lows, and even longtime allies were distancing themselves from him. The public perception was shifting. Once seen as a steady hand in turbulent times, Biden was now viewed by many as a symbol of corruption, entangled in a web he had never expected to unravel. Despite the mounting pressure, President Biden's team refused to give in. Denials poured out from all corners. They claimed the documents were either forged or misinterpreted. Press briefings became more hostile, with spokespeople desperately attempting to cast doubt on Pam's findings. But the truth was already out, and the American public wasn't buying it. Pam's phone was constantly ringing with new information, new threats, and new allies. She was inundated with calls from individuals who had either worked within the Biden administration or in agencies that were now under investigation. These were whistleblowers, some of them frightened for their lives, who had crucial information that could add further fuel to the fire. In one such call, a former high-ranking official in the FBI warned Pam of an impending attack on her credibility. "They're planning something big," the voice said, barely audible over the line. "Be careful. There's talk of trying to discredit you, make you the target of a smear campaign. Don't be surprised if they try to bring up your past." Pam took the warning seriously, but she was undeterred. She knew the stakes, and she was willing to fight through whatever came her way. She had taken on corrupt politicians before, but this was different. This wasn't just about one scandal, it was about exposing the system that had allowed such corruption to fester for decades. As the pressure grew, the congressional hearings began. Pam was called to testify, and it was clear from the outset that the Bidens would do everything they could to discredit her. But what they didn't count on was the growing support from both sides of the aisle. Republicans and moderate Democrats, once wary of taking a stand against the Bidens, were now openly calling for accountability. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Pam took the stand with calm resolve, knowing that this was her moment to not only expose the truth but also to hold those in power accountable. As she recounted the information she had uncovered, laying out the intricate details of the Bidens' dealings, the room was filled with tension. The evidence she had compiled was irrefutable, and it left little room for doubt. The documents, the communications, the witnesses, it all pointed to the same conclusion: the Bidens had sold access to the highest offices in the land for their own personal gain. Her testimony was a pivotal moment. By the end of the hearing, a wave of new investigations was announced. Calls for impeachment gained even more momentum. The Department of Justice, already reeling from accusations of cover-ups, found itself under direct scrutiny. Merrick Garland, who had attempted to sidestep responsibility, was now in the hot seat, facing questions from lawmakers who had been forced into a corner by Pam's relentless pursuit of the truth. As the investigation continued, the revelations only grew more damning. Names were named, and the connections between the Bidens and powerful foreign interests became clearer with each passing day. For the first time, it seemed like the corruption that had thrived in the shadows for so long was finally being exposed for the entire world to see. Pam Bondi was no longer just a political figure, she had become a symbol of resistance. She was the woman who refused to back down, even when the entire political establishment had turned against her. Her actions had set in motion a series of events that no one could have predicted. The walls that had long protected the elite in Washington were crumbling, and there was no telling how far the consequences would reach. In the days that followed, whispers of a larger conspiracy began to surface. Some claimed that there were even more powerful figures involved, people whose influence reached into global financial markets, intelligence agencies, and the very infrastructure of American politics. Pam didn't care. She had one goal now, to see this investigation through to the end, no matter the cost. She had exposed the corruption, but the reckoning wasn't over yet. The takedown had begun, and it was only a matter of time before those responsible would have to face the consequences of their actions. The pressure on the Biden administration reached an all-time high as Pam Bondi's revelations continued to dominate the headlines. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, more cracks appeared in the facade that had once shielded the powerful elite. It was no longer just about Hunter Biden, it was about the very heart of the government, and how deeply corruption had infiltrated it. Pam had become a target in ways she had never imagined. Threats against her were constant. Her personal safety was compromised. At times, she felt the weight of her mission so strongly that it almost seemed unbearable. But she knew there could be no turning back. The stakes had escalated beyond anything personal. This wasn't just about revenge or political retribution, it was about the future of the country, the trust the American people had placed in their leaders, and the corruption that had plagued them for far too long. As new evidence emerged, the connections between the Bidens and foreign governments became clearer, revealing the extent to which the entire system had been compromised. Documents from overseas corporations tied to the Biden family's business dealings were leaked, some of them dating back years, proving that not only had Joe Biden been involved in these dealings, but that he had been personally enriched through his son's international connections. The media was relentless in its coverage, and soon it wasn't just Pam who was calling for accountability. Public demand for answers reached a boiling point. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Pam's sources inside the government, who had stayed hidden for so long, had uncovered an even deeper conspiracy. While Hunter Biden had been the visible target, a network of powerful figures within the U.S. government had orchestrated a series of international financial deals designed to siphon off funds into private accounts, enriching politicians and bureaucrats at the expense of the American taxpayer. It was a vast web, stretching beyond just the Bidens. And it was about to unravel. The tipping point came when a former senior intelligence officer, who had been working undercover for years, stepped forward with irrefutable evidence. This officer had personally overseen communications between the highest-ranking officials in the U.S. government and foreign adversaries, confirming that millions in bribes and kickbacks had flowed into the coffers of American political elites, not just the Bidens. This revelation was the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just about corruption, it was a direct threat to national security. Pam had known the moment she uncovered the evidence that it would change everything, but the sheer scale of the corruption was staggering. This wasn't a few bad actors, it was an entire system designed to operate for the benefit of a few at the top. With this new information, Pam moved quickly. The DOJ, now exposed for its role in the cover-up, was forced to act. Attorney General Merrick Garland was removed from his post under immense public and political pressure. Congress, now under fire for its failure to take action sooner, launched a full investigation into the breadth of the conspiracy. A special prosecutor was appointed, and the investigations reached all the way to the Oval Office. The public outcry was deafening, with protests, calls for impeachment, and demands for accountability pouring in from every corner of the nation. In the final weeks, the Bidens were forced to address the mounting evidence publicly. Joe Biden, once seen as the unshakable figure at the center of the Democratic Party, stood at a podium, visibly shaken, as he tried to explain his involvement in the scandal. His words were hollow, his assurances empty. The damage had already been done. The American people no longer trusted him, and the evidence was undeniable. The impeachment process began in earnest. Pam, who had faced threats and attacks every step of the way, now watched as the pieces finally fell into place. The Biden's empire, built on corruption and deceit, was crumbling. No amount of political spin could save them now. The final days of the scandal were a whirlwind. With mounting evidence, impeachment hearings began in the House, and the Senate prepared for what would be an unprecedented trial. The Bidens' political future was all but over. Pam Bondi, once just another political figure in the landscape of Washington, had become the driving force that brought the truth to light. Her name became synonymous with justice, resistance, and unyielding courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Her relentless pursuit of the truth had torn down a political dynasty, and in the process, had restored a measure of faith in the integrity of the American system. As the nation watched, Pam took one last moment to reflect. The battle had been long, filled with danger and uncertainty, but the reckoning had arrived. The corrupt empire that had once seemed untouchable was now a thing of the past. The American people had seen through the lies, and they had demanded accountability. And for Pam Bondi, the fight for justice wasn't over. It was just the beginning.